Hi, I'm Brian.
And I'm Sharon.
I had a 40-year porn addiction.
Porn was an unwelcome guest for 32 years of our marriage.
I found hope and freedom when I attended a Gateway to Freedom weekend.
And I found hope and the courage to begin my healing journey while attending Wives Care.
Don't be like us and allow porn to wreak havoc in your lives.
Reach out to Be Broken today.
To learn more about Gateway to Freedom 3-day intensive for men and Wives Care online groups, visit bebroken.org or call 210-822-8201. That's bebroken.org or 210-822-8201.
What I would probably say to any woman I was sitting with, and she's telling me this feels unfair, and I would say, you are absolutely right. It does feel unfair. However, what also feels unfair is when you're back in the crisis and you don't have anything to grab onto. And this is what we would refer to as good self-care.
Good day, friends. Jonathan Daugherty here with another episode of the PSR Podcast, which is a listener-supported outreach of Be Broken Ministries. Now, before we get into today's episode, I want to invite you to prayerfully consider giving towards our mid-year fundraising campaign, which we're calling Deep and Wide. Because, Be Broken is not just a triage ministry, just kind of bandaging up the broken and sending them on their way. No, it's actually through the support of our generous champions that Be Broken has been able to walk with men, women, and families along the entire transformation pathway of heal, grow, and share. And so today, I want to invite you to be one of those champions, if you aren't already. Please support the Deep and Wide campaign through monthly giving or a special gift so that Be Broken can continue to walk the path with you and others. Your generosity is going to help bring healing to the deepest places and hope to the widest spaces. So you can offer your gift today at bebroken.org/donate. And I just want to say thank you for being a PSR listener and for your partnership in this ministry. With that, I want to talk about today's episode because in today's episode, I have Lyschel Burket on to talk about something that every betrayed spouse needs to think about. What happens if there's a relapse? And so we get honest about how deeply destabilizing that can be, especially for wives who've already been through the pain of betrayal and are trying to rebuild some sense of safety. Lyschel helps us understand why a relapse can feel like an entirely new trauma. It can knock a wife's body and mind right back into survival mode, making it hard to think clearly, make decisions, or even know what to do next. That's why we spend time talking about the value of a relapse safety plan, which is really a practical way to prepare before a crisis hits. We walk through the important pieces of that plan, including how to define the difference between a slip and a relapse, why it matters to think ahead about your physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, and relational needs, and how a plan can actually reduce panic when life feels chaotic. We also talk about the unfairness that many wives feel in having to create this kind of plan, and why it still can be an act of wisdom and self-care. At the heart of it all, Lyschel reminds us that a woman's safety is not ultimately dependent on her husband's choices. God is the true source of her provision, protection, and hope. To learn more about Lyschel and the resources that she offers to wives, visit hoperedefined.org. You can also find additional resources at our website, bebroken.org, or we're going to put some specific links in today's show notes that will help you take your next step. And of course, friends, I'm going to invite you to rate and review the podcast to help others find it. Now, let's dive into today's hopeful and practical conversation with Lyschel. Well, all right, we have back with us Lyschel Burket. So, Lyschel, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so we've had you on a few times. You're one of our favorite go-tos when it comes to helping wives and women navigate betrayal trauma and understand how do you heal when there's been sexual brokenness and betrayal in your relationship. And today we're going to get into, I think, what is a very practical conversation for many wives who are wondering, what do I do about relapse in my partner? But before we do that, can you share just for those who maybe haven't seen some of your previous podcasts with us, or maybe aren't familiar with your work, can you give us a little bit of what you do and the kind of help that you provide for women?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm the executive director and founder of a ministry called Hope Redefined. We're based out of Knoxville, Tennessee, but support and care for women all over the world. We support them through online support groups, a private online community. We also support them with a retreat. We offer a retreat twice a year, as well as we have a coaching team of about 7 professional coaches on our team. So we specifically offer support for women. We actually don't have any division for men, and I really felt called, like the Lord wanted me to stay in that space, specifically because I got to put and invest all the resources in that one direction versus having to feel like you have to split it. So I love partnering with Be Broken, and we get to work a lot with the women who come out of your guys' wives care group. And when they start to look for like a deeper sense of healing, it's not that they can't get that in wives care, but when it comes to some specifics, we're a great place to explore and see if there's support there. So I'm also a board member with AppSats, and have been a board member with them since 2021, and serve on a few committees there, and really appreciate and love the work I get to do there. And then I don't have a job title, but I am very nosy and very busy with sales on a regular basis. So I get to take on certain things different each year. So
now, for those who maybe thought you had a mini stroke there when you said AppSats, can you tell them what that is for those who maybe don't know what that means?
Yes. So AppSats is a training program for professionals and coaches to discover a specialty within the area of caring for those navigating betrayal trauma. AppSats stands for the Association of Partners of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists. I know it's a mouthful. That's why we all just affectionately refer to it as AppSats. But it was an organization that was birthed from Dr. Barbara Steffens and several others in the field to begin to equip counselors, coaches, therapists, coaches, psychiatrists, et cetera, in the arena of understanding how to walk with individuals who are healing from betrayal. So, and then from that, just as an extra plug, from that, we have birthed a training that we offer to pastoral leaders. And I know that you guys have some resources as well in that arena. It's called Shepherding Through Crisis. And it's a 1-day training specifically designed to help those who are in faith communities. You don't have to be a pastor specifically, just a faith community member to know how to walk with people in their community that are navigating this in their story.
That's great. Well, let's kind of set up the scenario that we're going to be talking about today, where we have a couple, and the husband has been unfaithful sexually, and we're talking about a couple that may be looking to try to restore or at least work on the relationship, and the wife is dealing with her own betrayal trauma, but there's the very real, not just possibility, but probability that there's going to be stumbles in her husband, even as he's maybe active in recovery or seeking recovery, and what we might call a relapse. And so we want to talk about, for the wife, what does a relapse safety plan look like? But first, I just want to talk about that issue of relapse in a relationship like that. And why is relapse, why does that feel so destabilizing for the betrayed partner when a relapse occurs? Because this is post-disclosure, or at least discovery, right? And can you talk to us from the wife's perspective of what does a relapse do to a betrayed partner?
Yeah. Well, I think you used a lot of language that effectively describes it. It's destabilizing. And where most of the time I can speak from my own experience, but also the clients and women I have gotten to journey with, is that there's a part of this that I can tell you that in my story, after my husband had started to find some level of sobriety, and had been several years, I remember having someone ask me, well, what happens if he relapses? So I went back to him with that question because I didn't have an answer. And his response was, well, that'll never happen because I have kicked this. I have overcome the demons that have taken me out, so on and so forth. And maybe it was naivete, but I'm going to tell you that I totally was buying into that. I was like, right, he knows how he's going to do life moving forward. And then obviously that wasn't exactly how our story played out. And then there was a relapse. And I think that for so many partners, it is that feeling of the floor coming out from underneath you again, because you're living life, you're attempting to return to quote normal, and you're trying to do the things and not feel like you're in such a state of hypervigilance, and you're learning how to surrender things to him. And so it's kind of like, I mean, we use the analogy all the time about, betrayal and the impact, and it feels like being in a car wreck. And what I would say is to continue that analogy, we have finally felt like we've rebuilt a level of trust with this person that we're letting them drive again. Right. And we're not hyperventilating in the car anymore when you're on the road. And then when a relapse happens, it's another accident. It's another, and depending on the conditions and all the things that surround that, it can be catastrophic. And so it is a real thing.
Can you talk a little bit about
any of us want to do?
Yeah. And can you talk about a little bit of just what is happening on multiple levels? What is happening in a wife emotionally, maybe even physically, when a relapse occurs? Because you're talking about somebody who experienced the initial trauma and is trying to work through that. And this is a type of kind of re-traumatizing. What is going on in her entire system? Like, what's going on biologically? What's going on emotionally when that happens?
Yeah. So typically what begins to happen is their body does go back into a fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, because there is another tragedy, another trauma that's in front of them, of discovering that, again, what they thought was reality is not true, because this individual has potentially been doing something that is not what they had agreed to. One of the distinctions when we help women create a plan, and I know we're going to get there, is to be able to define the difference between a slip and a relapse. And the encouragement is that they would come up with a mutual definition of what that looks like, because I don't believe that there's a standard across the board. But Deb Laser, when she wrote about that in her book, Shattered Vows, talked about slip and relapse. The distinction is frequency and acting out behaviors. And so when you think about so I'm framing all that up to say, as we're talking about relapse, there's a very different experience for slip. Many women can show and grab onto grace and problem solving and maybe not as feeling as impacted by a slip. But with relapse, it is a full-blown return to the behavior. And that certainly dysregulates the system. It starts to spiral your thinking into, what could I have done different? How did this happen? What were the protective measures? How am I not safe again? Right? That's really what it all comes down to. And with that, and their body telling them they're not safe again, then they have their trauma responses. So she may go into flight mode. She may go into fight mode. She may fold. She just may crumble under the pressure. And it doesn't necessarily mean she's going to respond exactly the same way as she did the first time. It could look very different, but it is still a new trauma.
And that really affects the ability to think clearly, right? I mean,
absolutely.
And maybe that's part of some of the shock that then a wife is going to feel, because she might think, hey, listen, because I got the information, I got the original discovery, maybe even a disclosure has happened. And so there's all sort of quote unquote, all the cards on the table. Mm-hmm. But then when a relapse happens, and so maybe she has an assumption of like, well, because I kind of know I could never be fooled again. And so I've got some ammunition of knowledge and all of that. But you're saying things can happen where the trauma can sort of take her offline again, where she's not able to have a reasonable way to process that. And can you just kind of give a little bit of comfort to wives out there that are going, yeah, that's exactly what happened. I felt like my brain just left my body and I'm not able to think rationally when this relapse happened. It's almost like you said, going all the way back to the beginning. Well, that's not technically true. The way it feels like that's true, right?
Right. Absolutely. So what you're speaking to is executive functioning. Our executive functioning goes offline. And what happens in executive functioning is that's the place that when crisis happens, our survival mode goes into that's what kicks in. But that also is the place that will create a challenge in making decisions, completing simple tasks, staying, grounded in the space, et cetera. And so what you're speaking to is like women feeling that overwhelm of like, I feel like I'm free floating. I've had women say that, use that as an example. And then I think the other things that happen along with that, the impact of the relapse is there's a shame and then there's a panic reaction, right? So part of what we're going to talk about is how do we circumvent that, the shame and the panic and the reaction. One of the things that I know to be true with myself and my partners is they hate making decisions that feel reactive. Like that does not feel good, right? They would like to know that they're having an opportunity to step into something and they feel confident that they were able to think about that when they were clear-minded. And so when you're in the throes of a traumatic event like a relapse, that can feel really upside down.
Well, let's go ahead and start talking about what you call a relapse safety plan. Like just sort of what is it and how is it different than just sort of crossing your fingers saying, well, I hope this doesn't happen again. Even though I do think for couples that are really intentional in saying, hey, we want to work towards restoration and both of them are doing the work, there is a hope that this won't happen again. Right.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
But a relapse safety plan feels to me much more realistic around that process of trying to restore a relationship than just saying, like, for instance, getting false promises like you did from your husband of like, oh, that's gone, never happen again.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a second, that in itself should be a little bit of a red flag of going, wait a second, nobody is 100% perfect. Like to tell me that there was just like a stake driven in the ground and there will never be any kind of that should be a flag. But what is it? And like, how is it different from just sort of wishful thinking?
Yeah. So the relapse safety plan was actually birthed from my own story and my own experiences because we had the conversation and I was kind of told that'll never happen again. I'm not going to ever relapse. I still pushed back and was like, okay, maybe, but just in case, right? Well, he was working his own program. And within that program, they had him working on his 3 circles, which many of us know are familiar with the 3 circles. And so with that was coming response, consequences, should you move into one of the circles that's a no-go. So he was able to tell me what he was going to do when there was a relapse. He was going to leave the house. He had accountability partners. He was going to make phone calls. Like he had the things. And for years, that was my comfort. I was like, all right, he's got a plan. If there's a relapse, that's what we're doing. Then the relapse happened. And by the way, he had presented that plan to me. And then he was in a state of sobriety for 5 years. So it wasn't until 5 years later where our life looked very different 5 years later. Within that 5 years, we had 3 children. And so he relapses. And the only responsive action that we really had in place was that he was going to leave the house. But we didn't have a time frame around it. We didn't know. It was just like, if you relapse, you're going to leave the house. And so that night, I remember him telling me, confessing to it because he had gotten caught at work. That's how his relapse came to light. And he had to leave the home. And I remember him walking out that door and completely just crumbling in my kitchen. And all of a sudden, I didn't know what to do with me. And I started to recognize that no one was going to come and help me figure out what to do with me, right? Because now we're back into crisis mode and we've got to get support for him. And so coming out of that, I began to recognize that this was a missing tool for all of us as women who are trying to stay in relationship and stay healthy and not necessarily roll back into our default survival tactics, right? That we've done in the past that may or may not have served us well. And instead, giving women the opportunity to step into something and say, I'm going to intentionally create a plan for the if and when. And so I like it to having a fire escape plan for your family, right? Not one of us wants to experience a house fire, but the hope is that if you have people living in your home, y'all have had a conversation at some point in time that says, especially with kids, if the house catches on fire, this is where we're going, right? So you have a plan. You hope you never have to execute it, but at least everyone knows what's to be expected. And that is where I see this for partners who are trying to navigate their own relapses and understand safety. Because I think that, sorry, I want to just say that because preparedness is not pessimism. And that's one of the things I think women get tangled up in, is feeling like they're just assuming the negative is going to happen. But actually,
or that it's just
preparedness.
all rooted in fear or control,
Yes.
or like, and I love your fire safety plan analogy because, and talk about why it's so important that if you're doing the fire safety plan, you're not doing it while your house is burning down. Can you talk about in terms of a wife saying there's a certain maybe state of mind that you need to be in to create this plan, and it's not when you are hearing the relapse?
Correct. Right. And that goes back into that reactive decision making, and how in hindsight, most women will say, I don't like making decisions when it's urgent, when the house is on fire. I would rather go and make decisions and kind of think through that process ahead of time and write it down for myself. So if and when the fire happens, I can go back and access that and I have the plan, versus feeling like we have to make so many decisions in the moment.
Because like you even mentioned earlier, that executive function goes offline when you feel the re-traumatizing. So in some ways you need something that's concrete and stable that was created when your executive function was not offline, so that you can access it when that does happen, right? So can you talk a little bit about, okay, what does that look like then to not only have a relapse safety plan, but what does it look like to actually then execute it or apply it when that happens? And maybe before we get to that, can you talk about what are some key elements in a relapse safety plan that a wife has in place?
Yeah. So I would tell you that the first element or key building block of your plan needs to be clear definitions of what is what. So I mentioned that before. What is a slip and what is a relapse? And I advocate that this can be done as a couple. Like you can go and ask your spouse, what is your definition of a slip? What is your definition of a relapse? And the hope is that you would come to a mutual agreement. That isn't the reality for all situations. And so there may be situations where she has to just decide, these are the boundaries. These are the lines that make up what is a slip. Because until you have a good definition, you don't know how to implement your plan, right? And we all struggle with holding to something like that when there's a lot of pain on the backside of it. In other words, well, maybe it was more of a slip. And because if it's a slip, then he doesn't have to leave the house. And then I'm not parenting on my own. And, or family pictures are coming up. And so we'll figure out ways to kind of move around this thing. But what starts to happen is you're seeing someone who is backing off from their own value system. What they will say at one point when they're in a stable setting is their values. And then when they get into crisis, it starts to waffle for them. So the first component, to go back to that, or the first building block, would be to get a good definition for yourself. And it is a personal definition of what you feel that is. The next is to understand, I think is critical, is to understand, why am I making this plan? What is my purpose behind this? Because forever and always, we will want to peter out when things get hard. Like making the plan is hard. It's hard work. And I would not encourage you to do it on your own, but the why. And then we start to move into documenting the needs that you would have in the aftermath of a relapse or a slip. And we kind of help women lay them out to determine, is this a slip? Is this a need I have during a slip? Or is this a need I have during relapse? And it's going to look like, it's going to break it down into categories around, there is, sorry, I have them listed out because my brain can't keep all this. So there's the physical, emotional needs. There's spiritual needs, financial needs, home needs, relational needs, and then children or childcare needs. And what I advocate for women is to spend, as they're starting to build this plan, that they would sit in each of those categories and determine, what is it that I need in this particular space? So we'll just take physical, emotional as an example. The first one may be that the physical need is, I need physical space. Well, then the next question is, what is that? What does that look like? Is that him leaving the house? Is that you all sleeping in separate rooms? Is like, to give yourself a little bit more structure around it. And some women will say, I don't know, and I'm not making that decision, but I'm just going to write down that I need physical space. And they feel strong enough to do that. Great. Another one is financial needs. We hear this often, that women feel stuck or trapped in trying to implement what they need because of finances. So it may be that I've had women who've navigated financial betrayal alongside the sexual betrayal. And so as they're developing their relapse plan, they decide that they need to have a separate checking account that has a small amount of money in it, that should there ever be a relapse, she has access to those funds to support her. And it's creating a level of safety for her. I had one client who that was a need for her. She would put $200 every month in that account. And at 10 years, they took it out and went on a vacation. So it doesn't mean that it's like you're taking that money from the family, but you are setting it aside in an effort to help fulfill that need. And then, of course, there's lots of other examples. We could go to others, but that is going to be the major component of your plan.
Can you talk a little bit about, and maybe you've seen this feeling come up in wives who, okay, cognitively, they understand absolutely there's value in this. I can see where even just these types of healthy boundaries for safety and just this is all good, not only for her, but it's good for if there's going to be reconciliation and restoration in the relationship, right? But can you talk a little bit about maybe the feeling that could come up that says, wow, this feels so unfair? Because can't it just be him taking responsibility and doing what he needs to do? And why do I need to create this relapse safety plan? Can you talk about it? Because there's a lot of unfairness feelings that come up.
Absolutely.
When you're dealing with betrayal trauma, right? And so can you talk a little bit about that, about even the idea of getting a wife to really realize, yeah, you need to do this. And yes, I know that it feels unfair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that injustice, right? Like I shouldn't have to do all this work. But what I would probably say to any woman I was sitting with, and she's telling me this feels unfair, and I would say, you are absolutely right. It does feel unfair. However, what also feels unfair is when you're back in the crisis and you don't have anything to grab onto. And this is what we would refer to as good self-care, right? It's not all self-care is fun, right? Like I had a friend say, I brush my teeth every day. I don't enjoy that, but it's self-care. I have to do it. And this is one of those places where I think that same principle applies, is being able to empower yourself as an individual to know that you have a plan if and when this event should take place. And what that allows is for you to have clear-minded thinking. The other thing I see for partners who have had to execute this is they actually are able to navigate the emotional instability better. Because oftentimes what happens when the crisis happens, we as women will shove the emotions, right? The sadness, the grief, and everything. We have to shove that over here in this little box in order to deal with the kids, in order to deal with the whatever. So we go into task mode because that's part of just the nature of the way we're doing life. And so it could be months or years before that grief ever comes back out. And suddenly we're caught off, we're surprised by it, going, what the heck? Why am I sad? And it's because it wasn't allowed to be there. And so what we're noticing as women have an opportunity to execute their plans is there's space for the emotions because the details have already been handled.
Can we talk about the flexibility of a relapse safety plan, that there may be stages that you can tweak and modify and all of that, so that it doesn't feel like I have to get this perfect and it has to be fixed and there's no fluidity or flexibility to it? Can you talk about how, going to the idea of self-care, that's on a spectrum, and that's even, hopefully what's happening is, if there is repair happening in the relationship, your initial original safety plan is not going to look like one a year from now.
Right. Absolutely. And the safety plan that I would have put together when I had 3 children would not look anything the same now that I have teenagers and a driver in my family, et cetera, right? Because there's very different needs for us as a family. Now, I don't want to put out the level of stress like this should be an annual review. Like, goodness gracious,
Right.
if I have to do one more annual thing in my life, I'm not doing it. But it is intended to be a custom plan for you. It is not intended for you to take somebody's template, or I guess their plan, and try and enforce it into your space. So when we talk about, the financial needs, that may not be a realistic thing for some women. However, in the future, that may be very different, as their financial needs change. But no, this is absolutely a very personalized plan. And being able to get the support of somebody to help you with the plan is critical, because it's going to be challenging. It's challenging for me to sit and think through all the things. And that's the other thing I want to mention, because I do get some women, when they do the workshops, they get stuck on the trying to predict every scenario. Well, if he does A, because he's done A in the past, so if he does A, then I will do this, and then I will do this. But if he doesn't do A, then what do I do, right? And so she gets herself caught in the just the real concrete pieces of the story. And so what we attempt to do is try to help you zoom out a bit and say, instead of it being he messaged with this one particular person, is it safe to say, if the relapse consisted of him communicating with another person, this is what I will implement, right? So we're kind of taking some of the specificity out of it.
Almost making it a little bit more principle based than down
Yes.
to every specific scenario that could ever happen, which is why I think the categories that you created for the safety plan are really helpful, because those can absolutely be customized: physical, emotional, home, finance. That's going to be different from woman to woman, right?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
you've really covered the complete person, and usually the complete situation, with all of those categories.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, can we talk about hope? Because sometimes just the reality of having to, first of all, just navigate trauma and go through the healing process, and then here this can feel like one more thing. And again, cognitively, a woman might be able to go, I get it. I see the need for having the safety plan, but can you couch it in the idea of hope, that this is actually something that can bring hope to your journey, not something that is meant to just be one more task in your quote unquote healing?
Yes. Yeah. I think the way that I'll answer that question is helping us understand that we as women have the opportunity to live a life that has a sense of stability and healing, regardless of what our husband chooses. And that is something that still can feel very foreign, because we can feel very dependent on their health in order for our life to be stable. And so what this plan actually activates for women is the reminder that God is my provider.
Mm-hmm.
God is my protector. God is the one who is going to see me through this. I don't have to put that pressure and expectation on my spouse, because it was never meant for him to be those roles. Yes, he has a provision part, but when we're in these places of catastrophe, we have to go back to the true source of where all of everything comes from. And so that is part of what we walk women through in developing their plan, is what are the truths that you're going to need to see in front of you to be reminded that he's still very busy. And the Lord sees every bit of this. Like, that's the one thing I had to keep saying to myself. I said two things to myself during the relapse. I said, the first thing I said was, God is not surprised by this. I am surprised, but he is not. Like, he knew this was coming. And so therefore, I trust that he will provide for me. I always go back to the story of Adam and Eve, because when you look at that story, he created food for them before they ever felt hunger. Right. And so he is pre-planning. He's always working. And so I'm like, okay, she had food, she had berries, all the things like that. The provision was there even before she knew she needed it. But the second thing I always said was, I've never lived in a ditch. And for whatever reason, that brought me a lot of hope. Like, the Lord is not going to have me live in a ditch. And I have people, and I have community, and I have, all these things but instantaneously we go to that place of being like destitute. So, but that is the hope too, that we're trying to support women in understanding, is that while the safety of the relationship is dependent on two people, and when there's a relapse that dysregulates or disrupts the safety, my safety, my personal safety, is not dependent on this other person. My safety comes from the Lord. And that's the anchoring that we want to be able to give partners, an empowerment and knowing I can make this plan and still be okay. And it's incredible to watch the transition that happens for women. Everybody shows up and is like, I do not want to be here. And I'm like, I get it. I didn't want to be here either. However, once they get the plan pulled together, or they start working on it and they feel that shift for them of being like, I get to decide this, and not just decide it, but decide it from a place where I'm regulated, feels really good for me. I feel like I'm doing a really nice job of taking care of me.
Yeah. And there's a really positive empowerment to that is not about being destructive or attacking or anything like that. It's just, it's still accepting the reality of what happened and needing to do the grief work and all of those types of things. But at the same time, recognizing the value and the dignity of her own life as one who's made in the image of God and worth a safety plan. Like, she is worthy of that in her life. So, Lyschel, this has been a great conversation. As always, we only have time to sort of scratch the surface of these things, but where can our listeners and viewers go to just learn more about some of the resources that you offer in this space of creating these types of safety plans?
Yeah, so we do offer a workshop multiple times a year. The workshop is typically a total of 6 hours, but we break it out over 3 meetings. So we do 2-hour session and they get started. We do a mid check-in, helping them continue to work on it. And then the last one is kind of a recap and helping them feel like, how far did they get? In addition to that, we've got several coaches on our team who specialize in supporting women with their relapse safety plans. And they'll do short-term coaching time with them to just create the plan. We have some resources on our website. You're welcome to go to hoperedefined.org. And there's multiple things on there under the Relapse Safety Plan Workshop. There's also some downloadable pieces that come with this. So, and then you can, I don't know about that. So I was going to say you could get it on AppSat's website, but I'm not positive. So there's some places to go.
No worries. Thank you. We'll make sure to get those things in the show notes. But Lyschel, as always, it's great to connect with you, and thank you for providing this kind of help for women who need it.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, friends, we're going to be posting all of that information in the show notes, so please check that out. And we want to help you take your next best step to wholeness in Christ. So please reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you back here again next time on the Pure Sex Radio program. Take care.